Is it possible to connect with anybody at all and have a conversation that enriches our lives? I'm Andrew Riis, and welcome to The Experiment. This is Hello Stranger. Each episode is a conversation, nothing more, nothing less, with someone that is or used to be a stranger. I am so excited for you to hear this conversation with Anthony. I actually met him on Instagram. He had a really interesting comment on an author that I followed, and so I DM'd him and we chatted, and I actually met him in person when I went over to LA last year to help Yes Theory with their event, which was incredible. Here's what you're in for.
Have you ever been hurt because of how much you love at a deep level and how much you're open-minded and how much you trust people? And is that something that you're willing to have happen over and over again? And yeah, just what are your thoughts on everything I've shared?
Like, long story short, I think that growing up, I didn't really grow up with my father around because he was in or out of jail like most of the time. And as a kid, you always have a picture of your parents, and then I guess you don't actively seek out the bad in people, especially your parents. But logically looking at it, someone who's in and out of jail has a history of it. They're probably going to go back. But my dad would always tell me, I'm not going to go back there again. I'm not going to do it. And it would just be time after time that would happen. And as a kid, that hurts. And then I would grow resentment towards it. And that hurt me emotionally. So I'll still be kind of standoffish to this day with my dad. But it's kind of just learning more how to accept who a person is. And that you can't really change everybody. But that was emotionally draining for most of my life.
I'm going to pass over to Malaika for a quick disclaimer, and then we'll get right into it.
If you want to listen to a super entertaining brief podcast, this probably isn't for you. But if you're ready to embark on a journey to see the world through the lens of a stranger, hello.
Hey, Anthony. Dude, so good to have you on whatever this becomes. And it's funny for me now, the contrast between me in my bedroom in Sydney, Australia, and the moment we first connected, which was a year ago. Do you remember how that happened?
I do remember how that happened. We were talking about the third door. You were following a profile that I was following. I think it was his name Elliot?
Alex Benayan. It was either Alex Benayan or Elliot Bisnow. It was one of the two.
It was Alex Benayan's book, and then it was Elliot Bisnow's page, because he was one of the mentors in the book. And I was trying to enter a contest that he was giving away. I think he was giving away a trip to his summit, and he asked to comment something that you were doing. I forgot what I commented, but I put a very heartfelt message, and I realized 2 minutes later, because I think I was sitting on the toilet while I was writing it, and I was so excited that I saw it. And then I realized when I was done that it was already too late. But then I think not too long after you messaged me about the comment, and you told me you liked what I had to say. And then we just kind of connected over a book, and then we got on an Instagram video call, I think.
Yeah. We did, because I remember, you've brought it back. So I was doing this thing where I would find Instagram, people that I look up to or respect or find interesting, like influencers or authors or whatever it was, and go through and find people that had really insightful and engaging comments and replies and thoughts. And I DM them saying something along the lines of, I'm doing this project where I chat to a stranger over Instagram video for 5 minutes, chatting to one stranger a day. Are you down to have that conversation? And bringing it back now, that was a really beautiful post that you commented on, because it was bringing up stuff, because it wasn't just a Gary V, go do shit quote and people being yeah. It was actually, you had to put thought into your answer, even though you're doing it while you're on the toilet. And so I don't remember exactly how many people I DM'd from that post, but it was probably 4 or 5 at least, because you could really tell a lot about a person from there. And then I remember I was with my dad staying at kind of the family farm where I grew up in Canada, and we'd just come back from a a dinner with a family friend. And literally the time we said we were going to call was while we were driving back. So the first 5 minutes of our call was me holding up my phone and you showing your face, but my screen was completely pitch black. And then eventually I rocked up at my house and kind of sat down and we had a conversation about life and about the book, The Third Door, and beyond. You gave me some other book recommendations. I spoke to you a little bit about my US trip and the vision behind that. You told me some of the stuff you're up to. In fact, the thing that stood out for me in that conversation was what you were doing to empower musicians and find a way for people who may not otherwise have opportunities to really get them and to find a way to make music their career path. And immediately I was like, whoa, this dude's like up to some really cool stuff. Like, I love it.
Yeah, man, I think one of the first impressions, I remember you actually introduced me to the YouTube channel Yes Theory. I'd never heard of them before. I don't know how I had never heard of them before. And you told me to look them up, and I checked out their channel, and brother, I was hooked for months. Like, I still go back to their channel sometimes and try to find some cool stuff on there. And they're I definitely see a lot of like what you stand for and what you're doing. I see a lot of that in their channel also, and a lot of them in you and like your goals. And I think that is amazing. I think when I commented on that post on Instagram, I think I was talking about throwing the events, getting started with it. And then a couple months later, you came to the US and you showed up to like the most recent event that I was doing at the time, which was pretty cool to have you come out there and see that. That was like my favorite part of the whole event too, to be honest with you.
Dude, it was so special because, you know, it went from us having a really good conversation and then you saying like, hey, when you end up doing your US trip, like you have a place to stay in LA and I might be able to hook you up with like a phone sim or something. And I was like, whoa, this dude's like amazing. And then, you know, you talk about how I shared Yes Theory with you, which I love because I feel like they do such a good job of encapsulating a lot of the values that I try to live my life by and have even years before I found them into simple concepts that are easy to share. And instead of talking about them theoretically, they actually go out there and live them and do stuff with that. And when I went to LA, it was a spur of the moment thing where I heard that Yes Theory was throwing a live event. And I really wanted to be a part of it, but not just rock up as an attendee, but use my skill and experience in running live events and community building to help out. And so, you know, it was a very last minute thing, booked a last minute flight to LA. I remember actually rocking up a friend also that I'd never met, but was friends with one of my good friends who I met through a Yes Theory community meetup, picked me up from the airport, had way too many pancakes at whatever that kind of pancake breakfasty place is. And then I needed to get in the zone. And so he dropped me off at the beach. I did a quick little kind of rings workout, had a quick nap on the sand. And dude, I should have really not carried around a massive suitcase with wheels. And that was really heavy because I was dragging that all over the sand, up and down. I carried it all the way to the waves. And went for a swim, had a brief chat with some guy that was in the water. I think, he tried to sell me weed, which was pretty funny. And then immediately I kind of just got changed outside by a public shower and like chucked on the clothes that I prepared for when I was going to head over to the S house and just start helping Zach and the boys. And I just had to be on. Like there was no period of hesitance. I just had to be on. And I remember being really tired. I don't know if it was the first day or second day I was in LA that I went to your event, but I remember being really tired by the end of the day, like ridiculously out of it. And so drained that was it the Friday? Was it the Thursday? Do you remember what day of the week it was?
It was a Thursday. I'm pretty sure it was a Thursday.
Yeah, I thought so. So that would have been the day. Yeah, that would have been the day that I flew in and, I was wrecked. Like literally I had a nap on the couch of this place where Yes Theory does a lot of their work. And Zach ended up waking me up after I napped for 15 minutes saying, "Hey bro, we're all going home. You kind of need to get up now, man." And I was like, all right, got up. And, you told me about your event, and I was kind of debating. I was like, do I go or do I not go? Cause I was so tired, but I was kind of like, screw it, I'll go, and I'll just find a way to show up tomorrow with enough energy to be able to help the guys. And so I got a bus, had a really cool conversation with the guy on the bus, actually. One of the things I loved about LA was it seemed to me like everyone was doing something, like everyone was up to something and creating something. And I just loved the vibe of that. And got off the bus in what looks like a kind of sketchy area. And I actually stopped off at like a convenience store to get one of my favorite chocolate bars I ever had as a kid, which was like a Hershey's cookies and cream that you can't really get in Australia, and then walked the rest of the way to the event. Couldn't find out where it was, asked a few other people if they were going to that event, but they weren't. And then eventually it looked like I found it. And I was like, all right, is this the right event? And somebody said it was your event. And then I just saw you, and you like ushered me inside, and you were just so friendly and welcoming and supportive. And it was so cool for me because we'd had a chat randomly on the phone after randomly connecting over Instagram. And then here I was, like completely out of the blue, a bunch of months later, attending one of these events that you kind of put your heart and soul into. And yeah, dude, it was just so special to be a part of it.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate that. I mean it. Like, you were a lifesaver there, bro, because for me, that was like, I think I was looking so forward to that event, just because we had like pretty successful events right before that one. And this one was like themed after the movie Step Brothers. It was house music, which is like my favorite music genre. And it was my first time DJing on my own show instead of just producing the show. So I was like, I felt like I had a huge weight on my shoulders, and then stuff was just happening with security, and then the early attendance, and then one of our main DJs left and took his like whole crowd with him to go pregame. So most of the crowd wasn't there. We didn't hit our bar minimum, so I was just like freaking out. And then when the event was over, I was just like happy to kick it and just kind of unwind. And yeah, brother, it was, I don't know, man. It was cool meeting. It was cool sharing that experience. I know I don't think we got a chance to talk really about how your Yes Theory experience was, other than text about it. But how was the whole experience for you, like overall? That's such a cool thing to have come to LA to do.
Yeah, it felt surreal for me because it was a thing that I knew I wanted to do at some point in time. And during my time when I was studying at McGill in Montreal, that's kind of the time when I really started engaging with Yes Theory content. So I'd already met up with someone from the Yes Theory fan base a week after they opened their Facebook group when I was speaking at a event in India earlier that year. But I became really engaged when I found that I didn't really find my core group of people, my core friend group, too easily at McGill. And so I was watching a lot of the videos, and I thought back to some of the kind of events experience I'd done. I thought back to some of the communities of young people and young entrepreneurs I'd ran. And ultimately, it all came back to my desire for connection and connecting people at a deep level and bringing people together. And I saw so much potential in Yes Theory taking the community, which all had very similar values and were very open-minded and accepting of one another, despite their religion, despite their race, despite any other factors, and connect them and take more of that online audience and build it into an offline community. And so I really wanted to help out with that. And I ended up cold emailing Thomas towards the start of the year and saying, hey, here's some of my experience. I'd love to help you guys when you start doing live events. And Thomas replied like 5 days later. And I was so stoked that he replied. And he asked me a couple of questions. I told me to send through some more info on some of the stuff I'd done, and then said that no guarantees, but we could definitely chat and it would be worth chatting. And so came out with this beautiful PDF outlining some of my experience and some of my thoughts on Yes Theory and the potential of it. And he never replied. And I followed up And he never replied. And I followed up one final time, and I can see when he's reading them because I installed this thing that gives me a notification when the email's been read. And I could see that he just didn't reply. And so I was like, all right. And dude, that's actually where the birthplace of the whole idea from my US trip, traveling for 3 months, relying entirely on the kindness of strangers to, experiment with different norms for connection and human interaction. And yeah, just kind of do something really beautiful. That's where that came from, because what I was going to do is I was going to travel from Montreal to Los Angeles, relying entirely on the kindness of the Yes Theory fan base, or at the very least, connecting with Yes Theory community members throughout my trip and telling their stories and collecting data to be able to show Yes Theory just how powerful the community was, because I still don't feel even now that they fully grasp it, having met them in person. And my hypothesis before I met them in person was definitely along those lines as well. But I had to go back to Australia for my visa. And it's funny because when I got the opportunity to go over to LA and help Yes Theory, it kind of, ticked off that whole goal, which was the original reason that guided the US trip. Now, I'm still planning on doing the US trip. And it's really important to me, and I really care about it. But at the same time, I find that really beautiful. And dude, there's a lot of stuff in terms of how I actually made it happen. And to cut a long story short, it really just came down to planting as many seeds as possible and just trying a bunch of stuff and seeing what worked. Because I booked my plane ticket to LA before I'd even made any contact with them at all. And they're pretty popular nowadays, and a lot of people want to get a hold of them. But I don't really want to go into too much depth into that now. What I more wanted to share with you was the day of the event, when there's the Yes Theory team and a bunch of other people that were helping out, and we're all sitting in a circle, and some people go into planning mode. And then Amar says, guys, there's a few people here that not everybody knows. How about we all go around and introduce ourselves? And it got to me, and I introduced myself. I said, I'm Andrew. I'm from Sydney, so on and so forth. And Thomas said, oh, dude, you're the guy that cold emailed me like 7-8 months ago. I'm sorry I never got back to you. Good on you for coming. I'm so stoked to have you part of this. And I thought that was so cool that it kind of came full circle like that. That was amazing.
Yeah, man, that's amazing. That's an amazing experience. I think it's funny that you said earlier you were on the beach. You're at Venice Beach, right?
Yeah.
Yep. And someone just tried to sell you weed. That is like such a typical, that is just a very typical thing to find anywhere around LA. So I just thought it was funny, like that was your experience, because it's like super normal here. Is weed legal in Sydney?
Yeah, no, it's not. I think you can get different types of things like CBD oil on a prescription, but it's definitely not legal. And that is one of the stark contrasts I found between Sydney and LA, was that LA had this different vibe about it where people were constantly approaching on the street, constantly asking you things. I remember just being really friendly with people on the street, and then learning very quickly that if I was too friendly that I would get nowhere. The first guy that I interacted with was giving me some advice, and he was trying to tell me where I could stay. And I was like, I'm all good. Like, that's fine. And then he tried to sell me a locker where I could put my suitcase, which maybe I should have taken him up on that, because I ended up dragging it around everywhere until I kind of got to the Yes house and left it there. But yeah, man, there was such a diversity of people, and people are just doing their own thing and living life. And I guess if we're to bring things back to your event and what I loved about it, it was, yeah, sure. Like, were there less people than I thought there were going to be? Yeah, totally. And what, did it go exactly how maybe you envisaged it in your head? No, it probably didn't. But what I loved the most from that event, and what really stood out to me and still stands out to me, was the memory of you and your buddies when you got up on stage and you're just DJing and you're just dancing around and you're having fun, and you had your like sailor get up on, and you had your sailor hats. And for you guys, it didn't matter like if there was enough people in the audience. It didn't matter if there were issues. You were just up there. You were just doing your thing, doing what you loved with not really a care in the world. And That's beautiful, man. That's really beautiful.
Yeah, man, it was cool. It was an interesting night. There was a lot. What I liked about it, though, one thing that I did like about it, is that there was an interesting fan base from some of the people that were there that I hadn't seen before. They came in from I don't know if they were there when you showed up because they might have left with the DJ when he left to go pregame, but they came in from I think it was Irvine. So if you're not familiar with this area, Irvine is maybe like 70 miles from here. So I think that's like kind of an interesting drive for some people to do to come see their friend DJ, and it was probably about 40 of them. So it was cool because on the West Coast, the United States, the Los Angeles area, every pocket is kind of its own different like genre of people, I guess you could say. Like if you were to go to San Francisco, the type of music that they listen to, the type of rap that they listen to is like way different than if you were to go like to San Diego or like South LA. So it was cool to have their energy there. It was cool to see them mixing in with like some of the people from where I'm from. I definitely thought that was interesting. And then seeing you there in the back, I think one of the first things my like co-producers asked you, and the guys that I was DJing with, is like, hey man, I think they're like, hey, do you want a White Claw? Or they're like, oh, you're the guy that Anthony's talking about from Australia. They're like, here man, have a White Claw. And then I think you took a sip, and then my buddy Taylor was like, no, it's yours, like you can have it. And you're like, oh, thanks man. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, I think there were two things going on there. One, I was working out, am I going to drink tonight, and how much am I going to drink tonight? Because I need to be fully functioning tomorrow. And the second thing was just the level of generosity and kindness that I was experiencing was amazing. Like, bro, in the short time that I've known you, or the short total amount of time that we've connected over the duration since we first met via Instagram, it's like, dude, you just seem like you want to help, and not just me, but other people. I mean, heck, you hooked me up with that phone plan that was such a lifesaver to be able to, when I finally got it working, to be able to have data and call people and communicate and have Google Maps. You hooked me up with a place to stay. I mean, you drove me all the way back to Venice, which I didn't think would be that far, but I learned LA is a really big place. You drove me back the next morning. Like, dude, you just have such a desire to help people and to really care. And I guess I was, the more it happened, the more it just kind of stood out to me as this isn't the norm. And I was like, whoa, like this is crazy. This is something really unusual, and something that I feel is personally very important, because I really love to help people. And I believe that as humanity, we could progress a lot more if people even just helped each other just 5% more, or even just 1% more. It would have a really big difference. So
yeah.
Were you always that way? Like, was the fact that I DM'd you on Instagram and then we just ended up chatting and connecting, is that just like a normal thing and you're used to that kind of thing? Or I'm really curious where your kind of mindset on all of this stuff comes from.
I know that when you hit me up on, to be completely honest with you, when you hit me up on Instagram that first time, at first I was kind of, you're always kind of skeptical when something like that happens, especially over the internet, because you never know who's talking to you. You never know what someone's trying to do. But I always like to be skeptical with the benefit of the doubt, but still keep my skepticisms at first, at least, because it's a safeguard. At the end of the day, you're trying to keep yourself safe. And I can't tell you the number of times I've had somebody hit me up. No one's hit me up quite the way that you have, but I can't tell you how many times people have hit me up trying to get me to do like maybe you've heard of like pyramid schemes or Ponzi schemes, because people are trying to make money. And a lot of times people want to try to get you to help them with their services by doing like Herbalife or any of those other like brands maybe you've heard of. But I always like to kind of see... A lot of
Forex stuff going around nowadays. A lot of Forex traders messaging me on Instagram.
Yeah, a lot of people, and it's just becoming more accessible to everyone, and everyone's trying to make it. But, sometimes some of it's not BS. And, sometimes you can really tell. And I feel like it's always worthwhile to give it a shot, because you never know what can end up out of it. And kind of like how you're saying, when you can go around out here and just go around and be friendly, and you might get nowhere the whole time. But it depends on what you're trying to do with your aim of being friendly. So definitely always like to help people out in need. I also, I know this was a little bit later down the line, but with the whole SIM card thing and everything, no worries, bro. I know how it is when you're traveling. I think a couple months before you came out, or maybe when we first connected, I was either planning to go to Europe. I think I was getting ready to go to Europe in the summer out here, so in like June, July. And I remember, so my phone plan works like pretty much anywhere because I work for a phone company, and they have a really good plan. But the world's infrastructure won't handle 4G or internet everywhere. And I think I was going through Italy, and our phones were not working the best. We didn't really have internet. There was a language barrier. We just flew into Italy from Spain. Spain was cool because my girlfriend and her friend and my friend spoke Spanish like very well. I was like the one who relied on them to translate. But then we got to Italy, and no one knew anything that was going on. The girls were freaking out. And we met a taxi driver as soon as we got out of the airport, and he was offering to give us a ride, and it almost seemed like too good to be true. And he was like helping us out. He argued with our Airbnb guy for us. He like became our personal taxi driver. So I know how much of a help it is when you're traveling to have something like that. And it's like such a blessing. So yeah, man, traveling to me is like one of the greatest things. And however that experience can be enhanced is amazing. Plus, now I know that if I'm ever going to Australia, like I'm sure that you can let me know what's cool out there. And I will be coming to Australia pretty soon. So I'm excited about that. But we all have our skepticisms. We definitely all have our skepticisms. Quick side story. Not so long ago, maybe 2 years ago, I went to China for about 2 weeks with my university. And we got chosen, and there was about me and like 13, 14 other students maybe. And we were out there for 2 weeks. And, Australia and the US are cool because, we both speak English, right? And then Italy and the US, or Italy and even maybe Australia, like some of the mannerisms could be the same because I feel like it's pretty Western cultured. As far as I know, I haven't been to Australia yet, but I'm just assuming. But when you're in China and Shanghai, it's so Eastern. And I mean that in a beautiful way. Like it was probably the best 2 weeks of my life, but it's also very scary. Like if you're alone, you can't read the signs. Like it's a completely different language. Not that many people spoke English over there. And I remember being in the university, and me and my friends, two of the other gentlemen that were with me that were actually down to go and explore, because we wanted to see as much of the culture as we could, right? Like we're only there for 2 weeks. We met some of the students there, and some of them spoke English. And one of them gave us the number to this lady who was a club promoter out there, this person, we had no idea who it was. And they use this thing called WeChat instead of iMessage, or instead of a messaging app. In China or in some Asian cultures, they use WeChat. And they shared her contact info with us, and we just have this random strangers thing, and they told us to hit them up. So we're like messaging her on the app, and she tells us to meet us at this one bar, and we have no idea like what's around there, like what anything looks like. And all we have from her is her profile photo. And she looked cool, but you never know what you're gonna do. But we decided to kind of take a bet on it and go. We ended up taking a subway. It took us maybe like 30 minutes to get there. We found her at this like kind of like nightlife area, and there was a bar she told us to meet her at. And as we're looking for her in the bar, I'm thinking like anything could happen. We could get kidnapped. Who knows? Like, what if we get robbed? Like, what if we get sex trafficked? Like, literally thinking of any little thing. And then she was pretty. She's like in her 30s. So this pretty woman like looks at us, and she like waves over, and she's like, "Hi, I'm Julia," and she was the promoter. And it turns out that she was like the nicest person in the whole entire world. And we were on our last 2 days there, so we were trying to like go to the clubs and go all out. And she got us free drinks at the bar the first night, and then she took us over to the club that she was promoting, and it was freaking sick, man. And then the next night we met at the same bar. She took us to another club that was like the biggest one in Shanghai, free bottle service, free everything. She even got us our taxi ride back to our dorm. And I just thought that was freaking amazing. So definitely, I'm always going to want to, especially I have a heart for people traveling and trying to get that new experience. I'm always going to have a heart for that kind of niche of people, and try to inspire more people to do that too.
I love that story because I had a very similar experience in India where I was connecting with a complete stranger, which was from the S3 community, and I'd messaged him back and forth a few times, and we'd spoken for 30 seconds while I was on my hotel Wi-Fi, and he basically said, "Hey, we can't adventure near my area and stay at my place anymore, but it's okay, meet me at this address and I'll drive you to my uncle's." And super sketch, and yeah, man, like you, I was kind of worried. I was pretty worried. And at the same time, yeah, I kind of just went for it. And for me, man, the moment when I was like, this dude's just another human being. He's really cool. He's safe. That moment came as soon as I said hello and he said hello. Literally. I don't know, maybe it was 10, 15 seconds later, but basically what I find is that I'll have a lot of stuff in my head about a person or about a situation that's just automatically there, automatically generated. But when I actually said hello, whatever thoughts, whatever opinions and stuff I had just kind of dissipated. And I was just there talking with this amazing guy called Deep, halfway around the world. So for you with that lady, at what point in time did you realize that, oh, cool, yes, I am going to be alert just in case, but she seems like a nice lady, and most likely there isn't actually any danger in this situation?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's hard to pinpoint that, especially being in a very, like, the complete other side of the globe for me. But I think after having that first conversation, that first kind of like hello, and to like seeing someone in person, that's when my tension started to get eased. What actually ironically kind of eased it too, there was another group of students from another school. They were actually from Australia and New Zealand, which I think is kind of ironic, because that was my first time like meeting people from Australia. That was my very first time meeting people directly from Australia and New Zealand. And she had told us that some people from Australia and New Zealand were gonna join us that were on a similar trip like us. And I was like, oh wow, like she's really like about what she says. Obviously still have like slight skepticisms, want to make sure everything's cool, but I was just kind of down for it. And then as the first night went on and she paid for our taxi back home and everything, all of my skepticism with being out with the strangers kind of dissipated there. I still had my guard up around like the area, making sure everyone was cool, looking out for my friends too. But as far as that goes, I think that's probably when everything kind of faded away a little bit, yeah. And funny thing about that too, actually, and I actually, on a side note, I learned this when you were out here too. I know that we both like English is our native language, but for me, it was so cool learning the different like English mannerisms. I think talking to some of those people, they were some of the coolest people that I've ever met. But I thought that was just so interesting. The world is such an amazing place. And the lady herself, she was actually from Slovenia. Her name was Julia, and she had different mannerisms too. But she spoke English, and that was her first language. And she like translated for us and everything. So when she was showing us those favors, I think that's when it kind of dissipated. And I think I like to pay it forward when it's small acts. So however I can show someone that, it doesn't have to be anything big or anything crazy, but I don't think everyone's out there to try to one up you or try to like harm you. I think if you can help somebody even in a small way, or even if the small way is just showing like, hey, I'm not going to hurt you. Like, I think it goes a long way in a world where people are very skeptical and maybe trying to mistrust people, but want to trust at the same time. So I think that those little mannerisms of just trying to be like a human to other people goes a very long way. And it definitely did with me from her.
Yeah, I love two things about what you said. The first thing is about this idea of people being really interesting when you get to know them beneath the surface. And for me, that's a big inspiration in terms of this podcast and whatever it becomes, because I'll often walk down the street and I wonder, wow, here's this random person. Maybe I've made eye contact with them and smiled. Maybe I haven't, and maybe we've just crossed paths. Maybe with coronavirus nowadays, they're walking on the other side of the street, and what is in their life, and what do they care about, and what makes them come alive, and when did they last cry, and even letting go of all the kind of normal or stereotypical kind of deep questions, like what wisdom do they have beneath the surface? And I just love talking with people and connecting with people, and I've never ever had a person where I felt like I didn't have the ability deep down to actually have that depth of connection and surface some interesting things about them. And whenever I've failed in doing that, I always view that as on me. I don't think it's ever on the other person. So one of the things I want to do with this podcast is to get people on that maybe have different views around people and connection or other things in life, and kind of surface that, and people that come from a wide variety of backgrounds, but do the same thing where we're just kind of having a casual conversation, seeing where it goes. There's nothing we need to cover. There were no kind of set questions I asked you to think about in advance. And I'm excited for that. So I'm looking at how to actually make that happen, because one of the biases or one of the things that makes that hard is that for someone to say yes to being a part of this project, to being a part of this conversations podcast, they naturally would have to be at least to some degree open-minded and at least to some degree enjoy talking with people and connecting. Although the flip would be if they really don't like it and then they just jump on to kind of like argue with me. I'm sure I'll get one of those at some point. So it's hard to find the people that are kind of fit in that middle ground. And that's something that I really want to do at some point. And the second thing that I really liked about what you said is, what was it? I think it was something about, again, it just comes back to people and random acts of kindness and paying it forward. And, oh yeah, I remember what it was. It was, you said that you feel like deep down, people want to trust. People want to be able to help. And that's been one of the biggest realizations for me, whether it's true or not, something that I choose to believe and choose to kind of put on that set of glasses through which I view the world, is that is the case with all human beings deep down. And I really believe that deep down we're collaborative people and as human beings, and we're there to help one another, and that's innate to who we are, more so than even competition and some of our selfish genes. Of course, we want to stay alive, but genuinely, man, like I feel like everyone deep down, even people that are doing horrible things, even people that are killing each other, even people that are just like saying really mean stuff, even whatever it is, deep down, I personally feel beneath the surface is caring for others and is craving connection and love. And so while some people may not be able to express that because of the stuff they're going through and where they're at mentally, and that's why you have to be careful of danger, I feel like that capacity to care and that wantingness to, if that's a word, to do that is within everyone. And it's really cool to see how we, as people who maybe find that more easy, can bring that side out of other people.
Yep, I agree with that. I feel like, maybe it's even our duty, because not everyone obviously will be as keen to going out and introducing themselves to others in the world, or being as accepting, even with our skepticisms, but being as accepting of the world around them, with letting others into their lives like that. And I think one of the things, you know, you have to recognize, I feel like we all do that are like this, is we got to recognize a privilege that it is. Because I'll tell you, you know, if we were born, and I don't mean to like generalize this or generalize women, is what I'm going to bring up is, you know, if I was born a woman, or if you were born a woman, like the way the worldscape looks might be drastically different. It might be a scarier place. So definitely, you know, I'm learning that more and more, especially being with my significant other for a couple of years now, for like 2 years. I can see how maybe women are more prone to having their discrepancies with the world around them, because it's a harder place. I feel like.
Yeah, and they're more vulnerable, and that's really interesting, because I feel grateful that people are more likely to be scared of me than to attack me, because I'm a like 6'3" or 6'4", like I'm a tall male. I'm not skinny. I have some degree of muscle on my body, and I'm not, if anything, people would be intimidated by me, which I can kind of control by my facial expressions and just being warm and welcoming. And then people kind of realize that I'm not a threat. But it's very different if you're a 18-year-old beautiful girl that wants to travel the world and connect with people. And, they have to act differently. I mean, even when I was DMing strangers on Instagram, the amount of girls that replied back, or even just replied back, and we actually ended up having a conversation, was significantly lower, because I think there's a greater perception of that threat.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I think I was in New Orleans a couple months ago. It's a beautiful city, by the way. If you ever get a chance to check it out, you definitely should. But I think on the first night there, it was just me and my girlfriend. It was me and Esperanza. Just me and her on a little trip, and we wanted to go out and explore. And obviously, in popular cities, there's usually a higher concentration of people living on the streets or people begging. And I remember the first person that came up to me was pretty friendly, and he came up to me and her while we were walking, in the middle of the night. I think it was maybe 12 a.m. and we were trying to go to that cafe called Cafe Du Monde. It's a famous cafe out there. And I had some change in my pocket, so I gave him some. And then I think he wanted to know if I could buy him a beer or something, because I didn't have any cash on me, and I would pay with my card or something. So we went down the street to a pub, and I bought him a beer, and we were conversing, and I'm just going on normally, because I kind of had that trust, and I wanted to know the area more and see what was going on. And when it was all over, Esperanza went up to me and she was like, "Don't ever do that to me again. You scared me so much." And I'm sitting here thinking why? Everything was cool. But I didn't really recognize where she was coming from. Because to her, it's just a random person that we don't know asking for money in the middle of the night. So I can see how those kinds of situations can be scary through the eyes of another person. So you just definitely gotta, I feel just realize where we're coming from. But yeah, not everybody will be like that.
Have you ever been hurt, I guess, emotionally, financially, maybe physically, from how open-minded you are and how much you tend to, from my perception, trust people relatively quickly? So to give you some time to think. So for me personally, I know that I have been many times, and a lot of the time that's been relating to businesses and projects, especially in my younger years, although I'm 22 now, so I guess I can't really say younger years, especially when I was 17, actually even 16, 17, 18. I spent a lot of time building an eBay business, and then the guy kind of blindsided me, and a lot of the money that I've made, he ended up keeping. I tried to build some tutoring companies, and I kind of had some awkward, definitely not ideal situations with the people that I co-founded them with. Now, some of the stuff was definitely about me and my ability to communicate and be upfront and direct and straight, as opposed to letting things build up. But there have also been times when I've been hurt, and if I take it back to high school days, I remember the time that when I used to be kind of a bit funny in how I approached girls I liked. There was this girl I really liked, and basically I didn't want to approach her directly because I was kind of shy, and so I bought her a necklace. There you go. I never thought I'd be telling this story on the podcast, but anyway, I bought her a necklace online and got it shipped direct to her house. And eventually at school, people were kind of worried, and it came out that, oh, this girl, there was some person online, maybe like an online stalker or a predator, that had worked out her address and sent her a necklace anonymously in the mail. And that wasn't the reaction that I wanted. I wanted her to kind of guess that it was me, and that we'd end up together or something like that. And I eventually confided in my best friend because people were kind of getting worried, and the school wasn't sure what to do. And I, if I remember correctly, there was even talk of like, should they involve the police and look into this? Because this is weird, right? We were like 15 and 16 at the time. And that's definitely something parents especially are really cautious of, is online predators. So I end up telling my best friend, because he says, was it you that sent, that girl the necklace? And at first I said no. And then he was like, bro, like, I really need to know. He was really good friends with her, and he's like, I really need to know. Like, things are getting more serious with the situation. And I was like, all right, man, fine. It was me. That was the first time I admitted it to anyone, because I thought the girl would work out in her own mind that it was me and come up to me, and then, I don't know, it would just all work out beautifully from there. But instead of giving me the chance to walk over and speak to her, because I said, I'll go have a chat with her right now, I'll just clear it up, he then broke my trust and ran over and just told her. And, the story didn't work out too beautifully in the end, although it's kind of cool. Like, I'm still friends with her to this day. But the thing about that story that I find relevant here is that whole thing of trust, because for me, as a 15-year-old boy, like, I felt like this was a guy that I trusted deeply, and he just kind of betrayed my trust. And especially with people that you don't know that well, that are strangers, some of the time I've found that they have other intentions and that you can't perceive it. I mean, I became good friends with the bus driver, and then he tried to get me into his network marketing company, and like, that was fine. I didn't think that that was inappropriate, because he was just kind of presenting me with something, and I kind of politely declined. And then he kind of was keen to be introduced to my mom, who was single at the time, because she was from South Africa. The bus driver was from South Africa, and there were just some other intentions kind of beneath the surface. And I personally have accepted that getting hurt is the price that I'm going to have to pay for the rest of my life for how I choose to see the world, and how much I choose to love at a deep level, and how friendly I am. And I don't say that as a burden at all. I don't say that to get pity. I say that as a reality of it. I am hopeful that I will never get physically hurt to the point that I am seriously injured or die. And in terms of risks of things going negatively from my US trip, that's probably one of the highest risks things. But I'm lucky, as we're talking about, the fact that I'm a tall male, and I'll do what I can to mitigate those risks. So have you ever been hurt because of how much you love at a deep level, and how much you're open-minded, and how much you trust people? And is that something that you're willing to have happen over and over again? And yeah, just what are your thoughts on everything I've shared?
Yeah, man, that's an amazing question for anyone. I hope if anyone hears this, like, they think about that to themselves. But I physically, no, I've never been physically hurt. I've had fear that something could come out of physically, like something like the China trip, or while we were in Italy, I've had fear of, those things, but I've never actually been physically hurt. Emotionally or mentally is maybe a different story. And I guess it's the price you got to pay. And when that price you got to pay, I don't think whether you're willing or not, it's going to happen to you no matter what, like whether you're willing for it or or you don't think it's going to happen to you, no matter who you are, it's going to happen at some point. Hopefully, not physically, mentally, or emotionally, but hopefully the latter of them, whichever one is the least to whoever has to deal with it. But it's going to happen at some point. I think the biggest thing is mentally, time. Time is one of the things like you can't get back. And I've had people sell me on on dreams, especially when I was a little bit younger, with like multi-level marketing, Ponzi schemes or pyramid schemes, where I thought that they would be like the coolest things. And I had a mentor, and I don't think their intentions I don't think most people's intentions are to hurt you. I think the vast majority of the times that we get hurt, I don't think that's what was intended to happen. It just does happen. But I had a mentor years ago. He was a really good guy. He had good intentions. But I think that the principles behind them were not the greatest. So I ended up doing they would try to sell you so many times that it's not multi-level marketing because of this and because of this and because of this. But at the end of the day, a lot of them are. And I ended up joining him and becoming his mentor. And then he would make it like a top priority if I wanted to join him, but then I had to pay like this much to the company and try to get people under me. And he was really good at convincing. He was very convincing. He's a cool dude. But it got to a point where it was taking up a lot of my energy and finances too, because I would have to pay to be in it and to gain access to the resources. And if you're younger or you've never heard of these kind of things, or you're dealing with a really good, essentially salesman, they'll lead you to believe otherwise. And I remember, I spent a lot of my time trying to figure out like how I was going to sell some stuff or how I was going to try to get new clients with them. And eventually it got to the point where I was just so skeptical about it, and I had to take a step back and reflect on it. But time definitely is something that I feel like I lost with it. And mentally, it's a heartbreaker when you lose time over something. Another one, like long story short, I think that growing up, I didn't really grow up with my father around, because he was in or out of jail like most of the time. And as a kid, you always have a picture of your parents. And then I guess you don't actively seek out the bad in people, especially your parents. But logically looking at it, someone who's in and out of jail has a history of it. They're probably going to go back. But my dad would always tell me like, yeah, I'm not going to go back there again. I'm not going to do it. And it would just be time after time that would happen. And as a kid, that hurts. And then I would grow resentment towards it. And that hurt me emotionally. So I'll still be kind of standoffish to this day with my dad, but it's kind of just learning more how to accept who a person is, and that you can't really change everybody. But that was emotionally draining for most of my life up until recently.
Wow. My dad has never been in jail, but a large portion of my life from basically like 12 to kind of 19, I really had no relationship with my dad at all, really. And we lived in Australia, and my dad moved back to Canada, and I went through some of those critical years of my life not speaking to my dad. And maybe one year I'd speak to him once, another year twice, but I kind of had little interest in that. And it was also a really tense period for my family, where everyone had different views around certain stuff and just family dynamics, and whether he did the right thing by moving back to Canada, and whether we should have followed him, and whether my parents should have stayed together, and just all sorts of stuff. And I can't imagine what it must have been like even further, like with your father in jail. How young were you when that started happening, or like was it from the time you were born?
It was for sure as early as I can remember. I think the first time that I remember having memory of having like a father is meeting him when I was like maybe a baby or a toddler. Obviously, I don't remember in detail, but I remember having to kind of like almost be like reintroduced to him, as if like I was like a baby when I had known him, and then like a little bit older, having to like remember. But that's kind of like my memory of how it was. Yeah.
Yeah. And how about like trying to make a difference? Because you clearly did. And I found similarly with my parents, I kind of, maybe it's bad in a way. Well, it's definitely emotionally unhealthy. I went through a period of time where I felt like it was on me to, I guess, bring my parents back together and to fix my mom and fix my dad. Like, did you feel like you kind of were able as a kid or as a young adult to positively impact your dad? And did you ever feel that kind of that was on you and you had a responsibility, or was it more from the get-go, like, all right, cool, this is just who my dad is, and I'm not going to kind of touch that or go there. I'll just leave it how it is.
I think now, or recently, I've realized that more. As a kid, I always felt more like this is my dad, but I've always felt that disconnect because I would see him like randomly. And I think I would feel the need to mend the relationship between me and him, especially in like my mid-teen like years. I would always feel the need to like try and mend that or try to make it right. And then maybe a couple years later, it's more of like accepting like this is who they are. And now I feel more a responsibility to be a positive role and figuring out how that role plays out. Because you don't always owe everybody anything just because someone is your parent. It kind of varies from person to person what you want to do with that relationship, I feel like. But I feel like I'm in a really good spiritual and emotional place in my life where I'm able to accept how this person is and what their tendencies are. He doesn't have bad intentions. It's just, this is more of who he is or who he has been. And I can't safely say I know his whole experience of his life and exactly why. And maybe, you'll never know, but I know the role that I want to play. And I know the role is maybe he is my father, but maybe in a way, like I can be someone that he looks up to. Also, maybe that's not through positive action, just with him all the time or trying to talk to him all the time, because I've been down that road and I know where it's led. But maybe it plays more in the form of through action and through doing, and maybe it doesn't involve him directly, but it involves doing stuff for yourself and being a role model, which is a very interesting relationship from father to son, because I feel like you will rarely see people who feel that they are a role model to their parent, or that is what how their relationship is shaping. Because I feel like most people look to their parents as their safety, like their safety net, or their comfort, which I do love my dad deeply. At the end of the day, he's my dad, and I do have some like connection to him. I do have some memory with him, whether they were positive or negative. He's a person in my life, so definitely do want to shape that relationship, and try to make it as good as it can be with what's given to me now. And that kind of takes shape in a lot of relationships, whether they're good or bad, that I have with people, is what do we have now and where is it going to go from here? What can it be from here?
Yeah, wow. Dude, this really hits home for me because, yeah, like obviously it was a very different situation, but the whole thing of what is it specifically that's like I'm feeling right now? It's love, man. I think I'm starting to learn that love's more of a choice than I originally would have thought of as a kid growing up. And I kind of held resentment against both my parents for just, their actions in terms of each other and the way they ended the relationship. And I kind of held against them that when I saw my cousins parents getting divorced at a young age. My parents promised they would never ever get divorced. And I was like, well, you broke that promise that you made when I was a kid. And eventually I reached a point where I realized that looking back, that what was more important to me was that I loved them and that I had a relationship with them. And that love means love for who they are. Not I love them, but I wish this was different about them. That I'm going to choose them and I'm going to accept them for who they are at the deepest level. And that's been beautiful. Like, I chat with my dad regularly now, and part of my motivation for going back to Canada to study was to be within 6 hours drive of him as opposed to a full day of flying. And yeah, man, I feel like a lot of young people are disconnected from their parents, even when they haven't been through kind of some of the stuff you and your family have been through.
It's a learning experience for everybody, for sure. And everyone's story is individually, everyone will be super diverse. I think, and maybe this is a truth for like most people, what I've learned of like what love is when it comes to relationships, and this goes for like any relationship, is I feel like a relationship becomes healthy when you learn that you love the person and not necessarily the relationship, but you love the person, not the relationship. Because when you love, it's okay to love a relationship, but the priority should be the person, in my opinion. Because if you prioritize what your ties are to them, then you have an expectation of how something is supposed to be. And when you cut that expectation, I feel like it leads a world of just pure love, man. And I guess you can relate that into strangers, or meeting someone over Instagram, or meeting somebody in another country. Is you're obviously not going to love that person like that, but I think that the tie is, you identify with someone in a room that you don't know as a stranger, and you hold that expectation. And that's where I feel like that's where most people play in, is they keep that relationship of, I don't know this person, so I'm going to keep all my walls up, as opposed to prioritizing the fact that this is a person.
Dude,
does that make sense?
I love that. Yeah, it totally does. At first I was like, what does this mean? But now I'm like, it totally does. And for me personally, what that means a lot of the time is in my relationships where I'm thriving, or in conversations where I'm thriving, it means I'm not focusing on myself, and I'm not focusing on how do I feel about this other person or our relationship. What I'm doing is directly focusing on that other person and letting go of a focus on myself or the way things ought to be. And the other part of it, which I find really interesting, is you're saying focusing on the other person instead of their relationship looks like with strangers. Well, your relationship is you don't have a relationship. So if you're focusing on the fact that you don't have a relationship, why would you even go up and talk to them? But when you focus on people as people for who they are, nothing more, but also nothing less, that's a really beautiful space to end up having some form of relationship, whatever it looks like, because you give people permission to be seen for who they are. And yeah, I just find people are really beautiful, and I love people in general too. Like, they're amazing. Everyone's amazing. I firmly believe that deep down.
Yeah, every person is a complex union of stories. So it's just everything that's under the surface. And I think that even being strangers in itself is a form of relationship. I think just by being a human, or just by being in presence, like you are related directly or indirectly to everything and everyone around you. And as soon as you cut those ties and you focus on what's around you, you really start to knock down the barriers.
Yeah, totally. I'm really curious if the fact that you almost like, I don't know about your relationship with your mom, but surely not having a dad growing up, you would have had to be more of a leader in your own life, I'm guessing, and more responsible. Like, is that correct? That's the kind of first assumption. So
naturally, when one parent's not around, and maybe you can attest to this, maybe not, I feel like that the logical thing theoretically is you're gonna connect more with the parent that is around, depending on the stage that the other parent wasn't in your life. But growing up without a father, really, for the majority of the time, I was a mama's boy. And I definitely did have to, I probably had to step up more than I did, growing up. But yeah, actually, when I was 11, my mom passed. I don't know if I've ever shared that with you, but when I was 11, yeah, a couple months after, so actually on my 11th birthday, my mom's mom, my grandma, passed away. And then a couple months later, my mom passed away herself. And I think that the stages from 11 and up, I think 11 is a fairly young age in the States. That's right before going to, like, I think most places call it secondary school. Here we call it middle school. So it's just getting out of elementary school. And I think that's kind of really, whether I knew it or not at the time, I kind of had to navigate myself through the world. And I don't think I realized it at the time, but that's how my world was shaping for myself.
Because, yeah, beautiful. And I resonate with that a lot, where I felt like I had to step up. My mom didn't pass away. My mom's still here, but my mom was really busy with her work and just like really struggling emotionally. And she had a bunch of health problems and financially as well during that period of time. And so I was left to be more responsible for my life at a young age. And I feel like I grew up quickly, man. Like, for years, I used to say that I felt like some of my kind of childhood and teen years felt stripped away from me, because by 15, I felt like an adult and I was kind of a lot more mature than people around me, just because of some of the stuff that I've been through. But looking at it now, I find it beautiful. And I feel personally that a lot of my desire to, take responsibility for my life and create something and orchestrate that, because it takes a lot of discipline, and it really takes a lot as a person. It takes a really strong-willed person. And I wonder, do you relate to that? Do you feel like, the situation with your parents is a big driver between who you've become today? Well, obviously it would be, even if it was good or bad, but more so that it's led you down the path you're heading down, where it seems to me like you're really all about letting go of the rules and letting go of the norms, and you're kind of just creating all sorts of amazing projects and initiatives. And I have no doubt that, over the course of the next few decades, your life's going to be really cool, and you're going to really touch a lot of people at a deep level.
Sorry, say your question one more time, brother. I appreciate the support, though.
Yeah, brother. Do you feel like, because you kind of had to learn how to kind of take responsibility and make your own way in the world at a young age, that's been part of what's led you down the path you're down today, in terms of kind of like really creating your own life, as opposed to just like, oh, cool, I'm just going to pick this career and run with it?
Most definitely. Yeah, most definitely. Actually, after my mom passed, so she passed from, at the end of it all, was a heart attack while she was recovering from something. After that experience, and learning that, I wanted to go into the medical field, and I wanted to be a cardiologist. I wanted to be a heart doctor, because I didn't want anyone to have to deal with that again. And then I got to a point, I think at the beginning of college, where I realized, like, and after going through so many like medical internships, and it was freaking cool. Like, I felt like I was on, if you know the show Grey's Anatomy, I felt like I was on the show Grey's Anatomy, like being in hospitals all the time, like working. It got to a point though where I kind of realized, like, I'm not necessarily doing this for myself. I'm doing this in hindsight of something, which I feel like is a great driver. And a lot of people, when they want to do something like that, if you have the drive for it, you should stick onto it. But I got to a point where I realized that I didn't want to be on call for the rest of my life. And that experience alone, going from that and changing into a business student, and now even to almost resenting a lot of school. But I feel like, that's definitely shaped my experience of, we have a life that we live, and I want to do what I want to do, and I want to do it the right way, and I want to do things the right way. Definitely feel like a lot of who I am today is shaped because of, I feel like almost everything of how I'm shaped now is due to how I was raised, and having to partially like raise myself after that those events happened. So most definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I feel very inspired hearing this right now because, yeah, I can't imagine what it must have been like going through what you've been through, and to be able to come off the back of everything you've been through and to choose like love and to choose trust. I mean, we spoke about like love and trust and strangers and connection kind of earlier on in this recording, but the fact that you've been through what you've been through, man, and that instead of, it would have been so easy, because I know it was easy for me, and I didn't go through 1/10 of what you've been through, to just become a leaf blown around by the wind of life, metaphorically, and just see where you end up, and just end up like with like really unhealthy emotional patterns, and just give up and be focused on the past. I was focused on the past for years. Dude, I had a time period of like 4 to 5 years where literally my number one wish was that I could go back to being a baby again, so that I could fix everything that was wrong with my life and make things perfect. And I would become like really fit and start doing push-ups from a young age, and I would make sure my parents stayed together. And yeah, dude, the fact that you've come out of what you've been through and you're just this guy that loves life. Like that's my sense of you. You love life and you love people, and you want to live your life in an intentional and deliberate way. You want to have fun doing it, man. You don't just seem to me like a person that's all about impact all the time. You love impact, and that's beautiful, but you'll also get up there on the stage and you'll dance like crazy, irrespective of, you know, how many people are there, irrespective of what's going on. You just know to have fun. So I feel really inspired talking to you, man. Like it feels inspiring for me, because if you can end up the way you've ended up, and you're only, you know, still very, very early on in your journey, we're both very young, like that gives me a lot of hope for the world.
Yeah. Most definitely, man. I think that everybody has their discrepancies with the world, and I feel like no matter how your life situation is, or no matter who you are, we all feel pain. Like no matter what. One of my biggest things that I've always said, especially going through this, because I feel like not so many people have to live through, you know, their parents like being detached from them, or living through the death of a parent. But that's not to say that experience is worse than anyone's experience. You know, I feel like we all feel pain to a very similar degree, and you'll never be able to put yourself exactly in somebody else's shoes. But no matter what, like everyone's going to feel some sort of pain. And what I mean by that is, you said earlier, like you haven't been through like 1/10 of what I've been through. And I like, oddly enough, I would really disagree with that statement, because you'll never be in someone else's shoes. Like people will have told me they can't imagine what it's like to lose a parent. It's a hard thing to do, especially if that's the parent that you identify most with, because that's the only parent that's around. It was very hard, but I think that it's not to say that you've had it or anyone's had it any better than someone else. We all will feel pain based off of the cards that we're dealt with. And I think it proves itself when you look at, you know, you see higher suicide rates in like really wealthy people, and some of us, you know, that maybe don't have as much wealth are wondering, like, they have all the money in the world. Like, why, like, it's crazy how they could just kill themselves, but you never know how much pain somebody feels through something. So I just think it's a universal thing. And I think that we all will realize that we all deal with pain, and we will all, ultimately feel some pain to some degree. So no matter what someone's going through, you never know how it's affecting them. It could be something small in your eyes, but to them, that could be their entire world, and you never know. And that's why I think now more than ever is why we need to be kind to people. Is why, it's a good idea to lend a hand out to somebody. I don't think you will always hurt yourself lending a hand to somebody. It might bear you some time, but sometimes you never know. Maybe you got to be a little bit more defensive of your time. But I don't think there will ever be anything ultimately bad or in the end bad about extending a hand out to somebody, because you can gain something from it. They can gain something from it. If it's refused, it's refused. If it wasn't what you thought at the end of the day, it wasn't what you thought, but at least it was there.
Yeah. Dude, I love that. And thanks for correcting me on that, because I feel like you're completely right. And everyone's experiences are going to be their experiences, and they're going to be subjective and they're different. And yeah, we really need to relate to that. And although we can't perfectly get in their world, do the best we can, because you're right. We never know what people are going through. And, unless we care to find out, and unless we open ourselves up to the fact that they may be going through something, and actually love them enough to give them that time and space, even when it may be uncomfortable for us in the short term to listen to them, we may never find out. Yeah, I feel like that's so important. And if you were to say, let's just pretend it's in terms of me. Let's say it's me struggling in terms of my teenage years and going through a bunch of suffering. From what you've learned, would you say to someone like me about how to turn that suffering into love, turn it in a positive way, and to grow from it? Like, what do you think made the difference for you in terms of how you've ended up on the other side of it?
Yeah, man. I'm gonna bring it back to like a time period of a huge time period of dealing with when my mom passed. Like I said, my mom was everything to me because I was a mama's boy. And when you lose that, is like, I could not tell you how many literally hopeless nights where I had to cry myself to sleep, or I didn't think I was going to get any sleep, but I cried myself to sleep and woke up with swollen eyes. I couldn't tell you how many times that happened. And it doesn't happen nearly as frequently anymore. It doesn't change the pain. But I think that going through that constantly, it was almost hellish, because, 11 years old, and let's say I was 15, a couple years later, that's 4 years of bearing that, whether it's night after night or every other night, or eventually like 1 week and then not, or feeling good 1 week and then feeling horrible another week. It's a hopeless feeling. And I'm sure anyone can attest to that with something in their life. Maybe it's like a breakup. Maybe you're feeling too much pressure about your job or your family, or you're not where you want to be, or you're feeling stagnant, or you're feeling complacent. It's a relatable feeling. It's a similar hopeless feeling. I've dealt with heartbreak from relationships. I've felt pressure of not being where I wanted to be, but I think my lesson stems from where I can apply the wisdom that I've learned from myself, is from dealing with those nights from my mom. Is the first thing is to embrace it, to embrace that pain. And the second thing is you have to realize that it's temporary. It's a temporary feeling. And you also have to acknowledge that as human nature, you're going to feel like that again at some point. And you have to recognize that, and you can't be afraid of it. And you have to sit in it. You have to literally sit in your suffering. If you're down and in a rut, you have to sit in it, and don't try to automatically just flip the trigger and be happy, because you can't. And that's fake and it's forced. And just learn to be okay with yourself there. I feel like that's super important. And I feel like when people are in a rut, they're scrambling, looking for answers, which is a human tendency. But I also feel like, once you learn to be okay with that, it stems back to being okay with being uncomfortable. But once you stem back to that, I feel like that's when you start to really be okay with yourself, and you figure out how to get yourself out of a rut, is knowing that there's light at the end of the tunnel and that you're not going to feel like that forever. At some point, inspiration will come to you. At some point, you'll feel more uplifted. Like you saying that, you felt kind of like lazy or eating the junk food, but then a couple of days later, a week later, it passes. Like the first week here, me and my roommates were so lazy, and we didn't care. And maybe that was an issue, but it's not an issue anymore. I see us all working out every day, whether it's on our own or whatever, but it's because you get tired of it. But you have to allow yourself to be tired of it, but also remain positive for the future too. Remain hopeful. You can't force those things.
Yeah, dude. And what I feel like for me was one of the biggest things that impacted me was role models that came into my life. Obviously, they didn't just like magically pop up there, but real models that came into my life. And when I think of people that are really important for young people that are going through stuff, when I think of people that are needed in the world right now, dude, like the first thing that comes to mind after this conversation is people like you. People like you that have come out of the end of a situation and found the light and just love so deeply and are living so vividly. And yeah, man, like really, I feel very grateful and I feel very thankful for people that have come in contact with you, even through your music and everything you're doing there. Because, dude, it just as it can be hard to predict the extent of what someone's going through, so too is it hard to predict the extent of our lives and how we live and how that goes on to impact other people. And dude, there are probably people already around the States right now who got impacted by who you are and by how you live. And maybe one day, a couple of weeks ago, maybe they smiled at someone on the street when they otherwise wouldn't have. And maybe that made that person's day. And maybe that person went and made a nice dinner for their family. Or maybe that person was a landlord that in the midst of COVID decided to waive rent for their tenants. Like,
I hope somebody's rent got waived.
Yeah, so do I, man. I've heard some good stories about that kind of thing. But yeah, dude, you're such an archetype. I don't know why I'm using that word. It must be the remains of my high school English days. For someone that has impact, and really, dude, I feel like your life is going to rub off on so many people all around you, and that you'll obviously partially kind of comprehend that, but that you can never really know the degree to which that occurs, because A, it occurs wider than the group of people that you're aware of, and B, it kind of echoes into beyond even when you're alive.
I appreciate that very much, man. I could say the same thing about you too, brother. It definitely goes to reaching out to people, man. Keep doing your thing with that. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, dude, so cool. So if we shift in the direction of wrapping up, then the question I want to kind of finish up on is one of that, and one of the fact that I know for myself growing up, I felt like I had to see the impact in my lifetime that I made, that I had to be like, all right, I'm going to build this business or do something, and it needs to all be perfectly visible while I'm alive. But as I've grown the past few years, I've come to realize that maybe that doesn't need to be the case. Maybe how I live my life can just be putting a rock or maybe even just a tiny pebble in the ocean, and we'll create these ripples that go and go and go and go. And so for you, man, I'm going to ask you a question. And what I want you to do before I ask the question is I want you to close your eyes.
Yep.
And take a deep, slow breath in. And hold it for a second and breathe out slowly. And if you didn't do that perfectly, that's fine, because this is the first time I've kind of asked someone to do this. And I want you to keep your eyes closed. And I want you to imagine that the world 1,000 years from now is a completely blank canvas. Completely blank. Nothing that's in our world currently, none of the systems, none of the processes is there. It's like it was all on a whiteboard, but someone's gone and kind of rubbed it all off. And the number one thing, man, that's going to impact this world 1,000 years from now is how you lived your life. And your life is almost the paintbrush. How you live your life will create this paint on this canvas that is the world 1,000 years from now. And yeah, man, ultimately the question that I'm asking is, if you could have the world look any way at all, 1,000 years from now, that there were no limitations, no rules, but you could design the world from scratch 1,000 years from now, what would you like it to look like? What comes to mind? There's no right answer.
That's a very good question. The first word that pops into my mind is just contentment. If it's repainting the world with people in it, I would want everyone to be content with themselves and trust their processes, knowing that they can't be perfect. That would probably be my biggest thing to say.
Why do you think contentment is so important?
I just feel like people are so caught up with trying to impress other people that they forget to live themselves and take on their own experiences.
I love it. Anthony, thanks so much, man. It's been so good chatting with you. And yeah, bro, this has been amazing.
Yeah, man. I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity a lot. Keep doing it, man. Keep doing this, because I think it's good for people. I think it's really good for you too, as an experience thing. But definitely keep doing it. Keep putting out content, whether it's for you, whether it's for the world. Put it out there, because you never know who's going to listen. You never know who's going to watch it.
If you enjoyed this conversation with Anthony, there's no need to add him on social media. Rather, who in your life is similar to him, or maybe very different from him? If you're up for it, it's now your turn to have a conversation. And if you need someone to connect with, head to hellostranger.fm/connect to get matched with another random listener somewhere in the world. Remember, on the other side of hello, anything is possible. Thanks so much for listening. You can subscribe to Hello Stranger on wherever you get your podcasts. You can also stay in the loop on Instagram at Hello Stranger Podcast, one word, no dots or dashes. And with all that said, here's a preview of my conversation with Max, and I'll see you next time.
Everything changed the moment when I dove off the regular system and I quit uni. I was doing this perfectly good quantum physics and education double bachelor, very good. I had a girlfriend. I was this, and everything was perfect. I had lots of money because I was working and teaching, and I was this from the exterior point of view is a perfect, life. And I was so miserable. And it's there's no other way. I have to finish. I have to do this. I have to, Then I met someone else, and that other person was fuck it. I was what? It's fuck it. I was okay. I said fuck it, and I did it. And since then, I was holy shit. The only thing holding you back is yourself, I think once you understand that, nothing is impossible. You just gotta freaking just do it. Once to do it, it was not that hard, It was not hard quitting, I thought about it for 5 months, but it was not that hard. It's not hard to break up with that person, because it took me 5 months, but once it was done, it's it's done,